Good morning and welcome back to another video, and today we are going to be going over 30 transmog farms that you should be doing. Now just stick around and enjoy the video. Okay, so let's keep this short and sweet. Basically, we're going to be going over 30 transmog farms that you should really be doing if you want to get into the transmog market. So I compiled a list of 30 of those farms in which you can do to pad out your auction house and also have the chance of getting some really nice mogs that sell for quite a decent amount of gold. That being said, let's just jump over to our first one at number 1, which is FARRAK. Now, FARRAK is pretty much the bog standard one, hence why it's number 1 on this list, and that is because it's one of the most well known for padding out your auction house with a load of different types of items. Some keynote items from this actual dungeon is the glorious leg plates and also some of the jade pieces for that as well. Basically, this is just a really good one in order to get yourself started with transmog, and primarily you would want to do a few hours of this one. And that being the case, if you wanted to pad out your auction house very fast, then FARRAK is definitely one of your top picks for doing so. That being said, let's move on to our next one at number 2, and that is the Wrath chests. Now, the Wrath chests are not a specific type of dungeon or anything to that fact. Basically, what you'll be wanting to do is go all the way over to Northrend and go into your Gathermate 2 add-on. Basically, what you're going to be wanting to do is import the data for the treasure chests, and they'll post up on the screen. What you'll be wanting to do is go into all of the zones and fly over to all of their spawn locations. There is typically usually 1 or 2 of those chests up at any one given time, and this works out quite well as to get hold of some really nice BOE items, and they are primarily blue in their quality. What you're going to be wanting to do here is just flying around and picking up all of the chests in a given time span. Usually I can do this in around about 30 to 40 minutes depending on how effective I am in order to actually do this, so it shouldn't really take you all that long as you are able to get around the zone pretty dang fast. That being said, I would usually do this on a druid as it's just so much easier with a druid, but you can do this with any class you so wish. Just may take you a little bit longer. However, this is a great way in order to get some really nice transmog items to put on your auction house, and they typically go for a medium-esque range, so anywhere from around about 7,000 to about 15,000 gold per BOE, so that works out quite well. That being said, let's move on to our next one at number 3, which is the Winter Spring farm. This is specifically for the Yetis in the cave Austin side, and overall I find this farm to be one of my most favourite ones. This is where you'll be going into the actual cave and you'll be killing out all of the Yetis. These have a chance of dropping some of the jade pieces, as well as they also have a chance of dropping a battle pet. As it is a zone specific area, you do have a tendency to get a hold of the Azure Whelpling as a little bonus for this. Alongside that, they do drop a load of different types of old school vanilla-esque greens, which sell really well on the auction house, and overall this is not mainly a padding one, this is more of one of those ones where you're literally going for the high ticket items. So if you do have your auction house already padded out with at least 1,000 to 2,000 items, then this is a good one to just try out and see if you like it. That being said, let's move on to our next one at number 4, which is the WILDVINE farm. Now this one is the WILDVINE farm, it's in Stranglethorn Vale, and basically what you'll be wanting to do is go all the way over to the trolls. You'll be wanting to completely massacre the trolls, and by doing so I usually do this in a circular-esque fashion. This is so their respawns are spawning in conjunction with the time in which I actually slay them. And that means if I'm running around in a circle, by the time I complete my loop, the mobs that I first started off with slaying will actually come up and respawn once again. This works out quite well as they have a tendency to drop some really nice different types of transmog items, especially as those ones drop more frequently. This can be used as a padding type-esque farm, but primarily padding is mainly for dungeon specific farming as well. So anything in the open world you may want to take with a grain of salt and only do those if you've got your initial few thousand items on the auction house already. That being said, they do have a tendency to drop WILDVINE, which is a herb that can actually sell for a lot of gold as well from all of this. Without further ado, let's jump over to another padding farm at number 5, which is the Wailing Caverns. Now, the Wailing Caverns is a great farm in order to pad out your auction house. This is because it has a tendency to drop some really nice mogs, and this is the lower end of mogs. Some of these items actually can drop relatively easily, and by doing an hour's worth of farming on this, it works out quite well. What you'll be wanting to do is gather up all of the mobs in this specific dungeon. I primarily use a druid, as I can use my Dreamwalk ability once I've killed all of the mobs in the actual dungeon specifically, and then I can then port out, port back in, and it will take me to the entrance of the actual instance, in which I can actually just reset and just jump back in again. That works out really well in just getting those 10 runs in. Overall, find this to be one of my favorite farms for Transmog farming, due to the fact that it just drops so many mogs in one session that it's just a brilliant way in order to pad out my auction house with some low end Transmog items, and it works out quite well overall. Other than that, the Wailing Caverns does have a tendency to drop some deviate hatchlings, which can actually drop from pretty much anything from that actual dungeon, so that is another battle pet you can sell on the auction house, providing this does actually take a little bit of time to actually sell on the auction house as well, but it's just a nice little uptick if in which you get it. That being said, one last keynote for this actual dungeon is bring a skinner with you, as they drop a lot of leather, which you can then bring in for a nice little uptick, especially if you have your Dark Moon Firewater Potion equipped. Now overall, let's move on to our next one at number 6, which is the Un'Goro Crater Golems farm. Now this one is located in the north side of Un'Goro Crater, and what you're going to be wanting to do is primarily just kill the golems. You'll want to take out the ones on the outside first, then make your way in, and then to the actual cave, and then just make your way back out again, and they should have respawned on at the outside. These guys are fixed with their respawn timers, so one has to be up at any one given time, and by the time you've completed the outside to the inside, the outside would have respawned again once you've got to the end of the actual thing. So that works out really well. They do drop some nice crafting materials as well, which you can then sell on the auction house as well as that, which can be for some decent amount of gold as well. So this does pair nicely with your Transmog farming. However, I wouldn't classify this as a padding farm. Of course, it's an open world one, and overall I would do this only if you have your auction house already padded out and you're going for those high-end items. That being said, let's move on to our next one at number 7, is Alderman. Now, Alderman is a classic dungeon. It's one of those ones for the high RNG ones, and overall you don't want to do this farm if you don't have your auction house already padded. Overall, if you are wanting to do this particular type of farm, then I would definitely recommend that you have your auction house already padded out, as this will take a lot of time in order to get any of the high-end items that sell for stupid amounts of gold, if I do say so myself. Things like the Papal Fez, the Jinsu Sword, and also Pendulum of Doom can actually drop from this dungeon. They take a very long time in order to do this, so if you get this on your first lockout, then congrats, you got really lucky. Aside from all of that, this one's more of a gambling one, as it's very hard RNG based, so you can either come out with nothing after your hour's worth of farming, or you can come out with something really high value. This is one of the ones where you don't want to be using this for padding out your auction house. You'll want to do this just for the off chance of trying to get a hold of something valuable. And overall, if you're willing to try your luck, I would love to see your results in the comment section or on the Discord. That being said, let's move on to our next one at number 8, which is the Silithus Cultist Farm. Now, what you're going to be wanting to do for this farm is make your way over to Silithus and go to any one of the 3 Twilight Cultist camps. What you're going to be wanting to do here is run around and kill all of the cultists. They are generally locked with their respawn timers, so that means that one has to be really up at every one given time, so that means that it'll be more like the Strangleform Vale farm, and therefore what you'll be wanting to do is you'll be wanting to go around in a circular-esque fashion, killing all of the cultists. This works best as a 5-man farm, as you can put yourself out as a pentagram, and then you'll be able to farm this more effectively without even having to move all that much. But overall, if you're doing it solo, you will have to run around in a circle to get the most bang for your buck, or the most kills for your buck. That being said, this does have a tendency to drop some really nice transmog items, such as like the glorious leg plates, as well as the T-Boo's blazing longsword, which both go for stupid amounts of gold if you are lucky enough. Aside from that, this does also drop the lofty gear, which does sell okay now these days, but it used to be quite well in the old school ways. That being said, I would definitely do this farm even if you are not padded out, because it's just such a great farm in order to do. So overall, if you are wanting to do this, I would highly recommend giving it a go. Maybe go onto the Discord and try and put together a 5-man group, as we have channels for that for anyone to use. That being said, let's go on to our next one at number 9, which is the TANARIS Graves. Now this one is where you're going to want to go over to TANARIS, and basically what you'll be wanting to do is go all the way over to the outside of FARRAK. Here you will find a load of graves in which you can actually see a load of trolls. What you'll be wanting to do is just take out all of those trolls in the respective graves. You can also click the graves for additional mobs, but this is not really that necessary, as you're mainly just killing the trolls that are not in the graves. What you'll be wanting to do here is you'll be wanting to farm up all of these trolls. They will respawn the same way as the Strangleform Vale farm and the Silithus farm. And overall, this works out quite well to get a hold of a load of high-end transmog items. This also opens you up to getting a load of world drops as well. So this works out quite well, as world drops work so good when it comes towards selling on the auction, especially for vanilla-esque content for transmog farming. I find this farm to be one of my most favourite ones, and I don't rarely talk about it because I generally love that farm. And yeah, it's one of my favourite farms, and I really can't think of a good reason why I have not talked about it yet. But aside from that, we're putting it into this video, so now I have officially talked about it. That being said, let's move over to our next one at number 10, which is the Sunwell. Now the Sunwell is definitely a padding type farm, as well as a high based RNG farm. This is because the BC transmog items that you can get from this are quite plentiful, especially in 10 runs. The Sunwell drops a load of high-end transmog items just on the off note, and along with that they have a tendency to drop some high RNG-esque things such as recipes, and also some really nice BOE items that you can get from this. The only thing that you need to bear in mind is, because it's a raid, you do not need to kill the bosses. You'll want to kill the trash at the beginning and then reset the instance. Once you kill a boss, then it will lock you to that instance and you will not be able to reset your instance once again. But aside from that, the Sunwell is always one of my go-tos when I want to get back into transmog farming again, and overall it tends to be one of my most favourite farms, as it is my go-to, that and FARRAK. Being said, let's move on to our next one at number 11, which is STRATHOLME. Now STRATHOLME is one of the ones that I talk quite a bit about because it has a tendency to drop some really nice transmog items as well. This one's things like Before we continue, consider supporting the channel by getting Dallas Guide to Gold Making, coming as either ebook or paperback on Amazon. This covers all aspects of gold making and how best to optimize yourself to make gold now and into the future. The link is in the description down below. Thank you. Now back to the video. STRATHOLME Militia Shoulders, those are absolutely amazing, especially if you get that drop. The only thing of note that you probably want to just vendor is the enchants for Unholy and also Blight. These ones are super plentiful. You'll get like loads of those in your 10 runs, and if you're doing it on consecutive hours, you're going to just fill up yourself with recipes that aren't worth nearly anything. So therefore, you're really going for this farm is high-end transmog items such as the Skull Flame Shield, And alongside that, if you're wanting to do this transmog farm, then I'd highly recommend you go for those high-end transmog items if you are wanting to do this farm. Aside from that, it is a good farm in order to pad out your auction house, but I would highly recommend you do other things like whaling caverns if you wanted to pad out your auction house. That being said, let's move on to our next one at number 12, which is a high RNG based one. This one is Shadowfang Keep, and this can be found in Silver Pine Forest. What you're going to be wanting to do here is run into the instance and gather up all of the mobs in the actual vicinity. What I tend to do is I stop at when I get to the top of the actual keep, and that is mainly where I just gather up all of the mobs, burn them down, then I jump back down again and then jump out of the instance and reset. I find this to be the best use of my time, and it gets all of my 10 runs in. However, you do have an RNG based one which is very high RNG, but the gold for it is stupid. That is called the Shadowfang. This sword is primarily a very good transmog item to actually get a hold of and sell on the auction house. However, it does take a little bit of time to sell like most transmog items, but the gold amount for this weapon is insane. And overall, if you are lucky enough to get a hold of it, then you're going to make a sweet pretty penny when actually selling this on the auction house. Being said, this is definitely a farm if you are wanting to go for high RNG and not really a padding of the auction house if you so wish to do this farm. That being said, let's move on to our next one, which is another one at high RNG based, and that is Scarlet Monastery. Now, Scarlet Monastery is one of those ones where you do have different types of dungeons in there. You have the Scarlet Halls and you've got the Scarlet Monastery. What you're going to be wanting to do is take the left hand instance and go into that one. That one is the Scarlet Monastery, and what you'll be wanting to do is gather up all of the mobs within this actual one and then burning all those mobs down. I generally don't go for the last boss, as there's so much RP at the end of that it's just not worth your time to get your runs in. What I'll do is I'll gather up all of the mobs up to the last boss, and then I'll just run out and reset the instance, or dream walk, or whatever way you wish to reset the instance. Overall, Scarlet Monastery is a great farming location in order to do, and I find this to be a brilliant one if you wanting to go for some high RNG based stuff for some really high ticket items, things like the Scarlet Boots, which sell for a hefty amount of gold on the auction house. However, I do find this one to be a really good farm in order to do, just if you are wanting to have a little go at trying to get a hold of a high ticket items to sell on the auction house. That being said, let's move on to our next one at number 14, which is the Saltstone Cave. Now, this one can be located within the 1,000 Needles, and what you're going to be wanting to do is basically run inside the cave. You'll find a load of elite ogres within there, and you'll be wanting to take those out. For doing this farm, you'll be wanting to go for the Saltstone gear that you can actually get from this. You can also get a load of different types of world drops as well for that that go for a lot of gold overall. And alongside that, this one is just a staple farm that I don't really see covered all that much, but it is definitely a transmog farm in which you should probably give a nice little go at. It's one of those ones where it's not really high RNG based, nor is it a good padding one. This one's somewhere in between, where it's just like, give it a go and see how it goes. But it's definitely a farm worth check out if you are into your transmog farming. That being said, let's move on to our next one at number 15, which is the Ruins of 𝐸𝐸𝐸. What you'll be wanting to do here is you'll be wanting to not take out any of the raid bosses. This is pretty much the same for every raid, but I want to reiterate it every time because I can't stress it enough that if you kill a boss, you will be locked and you cannot do that farm anymore. That being said, what you'll be wanting to do is you'll be wanting to go into the Ruins of 𝐸𝐸𝐸 and go right. What you'll be wanting to do here is gather up all of the scarabs within that farm and burning them all down. Once you have done that, all you have to do is reset the instance, and you have a chance of getting pretty much every green and every blue that you get from that particular farm is worth a great deal. This is one of the most highest gold value farms that you can do, and especially it's not really a padding farm, but it is a great one to get a load of different types of items that go for a high value. This is why I generally love this farm, and it is another one of my go-tos, especially when I'm trying to get some high-end gear to sell on the auction house. That being said, let's move on to our next one at number 16, which is RAZORFEN KRUL. RAZORFEN KRUL is definitely one of the ones that you should probably be doing regardless. It is definitely one of the ones I use primarily for padding, and that is because it just gives me a ton of different types of items. The chances of its BOEs are really actually quite lovely, as you can get those BOEs as long as you stick with it for an hour or two. You'll be able to get some high-end BOEs to sell on the auction house, which are unique to that particular dungeon. This gives them a higher value, and generally overall, if you are selling those on the auction house, they do have a tendency to sell faster in my experience than most other BOEs. This goes for the same for number 17, which is RAZORFEN Downs, which is just across from RAZORFEN KRUL, and it basically has the exact same esque thing. You'll be wanting to go into the dungeon, burning the mobs down, and they have a load of unique items attached to that specific dungeon. This means that when you're farming these types of farms, this gives you a lot of different types of loot which are unique, and you can sell those on the auction house. Failing that, if you do bring a rogue or have any form of unlocking any of the chests within both of those dungeons that I've previously talked about, they have a chance of dropping the recipe for the star belt, which can sell for a hefty amount of gold on the auction house. With that being the case, let's move on to our next one at number 18, and one of my favorites, and that is Maraudon. Basically, this farm is one of my favorite farms overall. What you'll be wanting to do is go all the way over to Desolus, and in this dungeon you'll be wanting to go in a crescent moon shape. This is because it has two entrance portals which you can use to your advantage to get your runs in faster. What you'll be wanting to do is make your way into a crescent moon shape through the dungeon, killing all of the mobs and looting as you go. This isn't really a pull everything and burn them down, it's more kill as you go. I tend to just gather up a few packs and then I blot it out as I go. So I do a few packs here and there, gathering them up and then burning them down instead of one massive pull. Overall, this has a tendency to drop some really high-end transmog items along with a lot of herbs in which you can sell on the auction house. And overall, I generally find this to be a great way in order to make a decent amount of gold in the long run. Once you've completed your crescent moon shape, you can jump out of that second entrance portal, reset and jump back in again, and then go back the way you came on the second run. And this to be a great way in order to make a decent amount of gold, especially for your time. And this works really well with a speed set, as you're mainly just going in a crescent moon shape, so it just works really well if you're killing and looting, kill loot, kill loot, kill loot. I find this to be one of my favourite ones in order to do, and overall it's a great one to pad out your auction house. That being said, let's move on to our next one at number 19, which is the Mana Tombs. Now, the Mana Tombs is one of those ones that is heavily talked about quite a bit. That is because it has a high item value for that particular farm on pretty much most servers. It is due to the fact that these different types of items for the Burning Crusade tend to go for a decent amount of gold overall. I find that this farm is definitely well worth your time, as you can do this basically in a loop. You do kill the last boss, by the way, and you're basically running it as in which if you were running it as a level 70 in BC. What you'll be wanting to do is just gather up all of the mobs up to the first boss, burn him down, then you'll gather up to the second boss, burn them down, and then you just do a full pull up in order to the last boss. I find this to be the best way in order to farm this up, and overall you do get a lot of different types of unique items for the Burning Crusade to sell on the auction house. That being said, this is definitely well worth your time, and also as a nice little side note, I would bring a miner when you're doing this, as they do have a tendency to drop corium ore deposits within this dungeon, so it can definitely increase your gold per hour overall. That being said, let's move on to our next one at number 20, which is the Isle of Thunder Zandalari. This is where you'll be going over to the far right, or the top right hand side of the map, where all of the Zandalari are. What you'll be wanting to do is go around in a circular-esque fashion, and you'll be wanting to burn all of the Zandalari down. These guys can drop a lot of unique Zandalari gear, which you can then sell on the auction house, and because it's unique gear, it tends to go for a lot more than just the general stuff. This is because you can get these items primarily only from these different types of mobs, and that makes them quite highly valued, as not many people go to the Isle of Thunder to do regular farming anymore, especially as we're in Shadowlands and not mob. That being said, this goes for a hefty amount of gold, and if you are wanting to pad out your auction house, I would definitely do so, because this does have a tendency to drop a lot of greens within an hour, especially if you are able to just burn down all those mobs primarily fast. I tend to use a druid and use my swipe ability. This kills all the mobs quite easily, but you can also do this as a 5-man farm, which works out even better, and just by dotting yourselves around like a pentagram once again. That being said, let's just jump over to our next one at number 21, which is the Isle of Quel'Danas. This is the Demon's Farm, and what you'll be wanting to do is make your way over to the Sunwell, but take a left, as in which you get up to the portal. There you'll see a load of different types of demons just dotted around, and what you'll be wanting to do is burning down all those demons. These are locked on their respawn timers, so hence this means that one has to be up at any one given time, and because their respawn timer is so hot, is so good, you can basically just mass farm this. This works well as a 5-man farm once again, and because it's an open world farm, you have a tendency to get a hold of some really high-end world drop items from the Burning Crusade, which go for a lot of gold. This to be one of my most favourite farms, especially as I can gather up a lot of rep items in which to sell on the auction house, which are primarily fell armaments and also marks of Sargeras, which you can also sell on the auction house for a pretty penny. That being said, let's move over to our next one at number 22, and one of the ones that is talked about quite a lot, and that is the Iron Docks within Draenor. This farm is primarily one of the funnest farms in order to do, and overall I tend to find that this works quite well. This has a high gold per hour for your time invested, and getting your runs in works quite well. What you'll be wanting to do is just run in and gather up all of the mobs. It's a pretty bog standard farm, and overall I don't know why more people don't do it. The sell rates on these items actually are one of the highest in Transmog, and overall the gold value is so high as well. This is definitely well worth your time, especially when padding out your auction house, as you get a variety of different types of greens for the Warlords Draenor expansion, and overall it's a great farm in order to do. But that being the case, let's just jump over to Outland for number 23, and that is Hellfire Ramparts. Hellfire Ramparts is definitely one of the ones for padding out your auction house once again, and overall I find this farm to be generally one of my most favourite farms in order to do. The Hellfire Ramparts farm is just in general is a brilliant farm just for farming and padding out your auction house when it comes towards Transmog. Overall, I find this to be a brilliant farm, and if you are wanting to try your luck at getting a hold of some nice high-end Transmog items for Burning Crusade, I would recommend you really well do it. This farm is definitely a staple farm, and overall, if you are a beginner, then I'd start here, as well as FARRAK and Wailing Caverns. That being said, let's move over to our next one in Northrend at number 24, and that is the Halls of Lightning. The Halls of Lightning is primarily one of my top picks, and that is because it gives you a load of different types of Eternals as well, so that gives me a load of crafting reagents as well as some nice Transmog items overall, especially when it comes to just in general padding out your auction house for Wrath-esque gear. I find that this is one of my most favourite ones for padding out my auction house for Northrend stuff, as it just provides me with so many unique and standard transmog items for Northrend, and just the Wrath expansion overall. It just provides me with that much transmog items just to pad out my auction house and get that sorted. It works out quite well, and it also just increases the gold value quite well. That being said, let's move over to our next one at number 25, which is Dire Maul. Now, the Dire Maul farm is primarily my all-time favourite, and I've talked about this one a lot on the channel before, so let's keep this short and sweet. What you'll be wanting to do is just go into the actual dungeon. You'll be wanting to drop down into the conservatory area where all of the plants are, but gather up all of the mobs up into the staircase, burn them down, and then dream walk out, dream back in, and reset your instance. This provides you with tons of different types of crafting reagents, primarily herbs, and they are the old world herbs. As well as that, you can also get items like the fiery war axe, and along with that you can also get a load of high-end transmog items which you can sell very well on the auction house. I tend to find that this is my most favourite farm overall, as it's very time effective for the actual particular farm, so I can get it in about 40 minutes, as well as a high gold per hour, and also a mass amount of transmog items to sell on the auction house. This is primarily my favourite one for padding and maintaining on the auction house, as it provides me with pretty much everything I need when it comes towards transmog farming. That being said, let's move over to our next one at number 26. Now for number 26, we'll be making our way over to the Burning Steppes, which is the Orc Formation farm. What you'll be wanting to do here is you will find that there's 4 packs of orcs gathering up all of their forces. They're about to take over the world, maybe. But that being the case, what you'll be wanting to do is take out all of those 4 packs. And by the time you killed the 4th pack, the first pack should have respawned. This is amazing for gathering up mass amounts of transmog items and getting a load of those world drops that we do love all so much for transmog farming. And overall, it's just generally one of those farms that is just brilliant, and you can do this endlessly. It's not locked to an instance as it's an open world farm, and you can primarily just have infinite to actually take out and kill. And overall, this is definitely a farm worth checking out if you wish to just try your chances at this particular farm. I don't really class this as a padding farm, nor do I class this as a high RNG farm. It's somewhere in between with that. That being said, let's jump over to our next one at number 27, and that is the Burning Crusade Chests farm. Now, this one is definitely a farm worth checking out. This one definitely works out better than the Wrath chests, and it's basically doing it the exact same way with the Wrath chests. You'll want to have Gathermate 2, import your treasure chests on your actual screen, and just go to every single spawn location for those treasure chests. Really dead simple. What you'll be wanting to do, just fly around Outland. Takes you no time at all to do this, and overall you just open up the chests and see what you get. Overall, you will get a ton of high value BOE items which are primarily blue. These ones are definitely well worth your time if you are doing chest farms in the open world. There's usually only 1 chest up at any one given time in a particular zone, but I have had the off chance of having 2 up. Being said, this is definitely well worth your time in order to do, but this is not a padding farm, this is a high RNG based farm, and you're mainly going for those high ticket items from those chests. Primarily, I would do this on a daily-esque thing, where I'd just spend half an hour going round the actual chests and try and test my luck on what I actually get from those chests overall. Aside from that, it's definitely well worth your time if you are wanting to go for those high RNG based items in the long run. That being said, let's jump over to our next one, which is also in the Burning Crusade, and that is Botanica at number 28. Now, Botanica is definitely a farm if you are wanting to pad out your auction house for BC items. This is because you can basically just do this in just an ultimate loop, where you run into the instance, gather up every single mob up into the last boss, burn them down at the last boss, and behind that boss is the portal to get out again. That works out really well if you just want to do things in a loop and a loop and a loop, and you can pretty much get a lot of gold for this, especially if you're going for those high RNG based items as well. So it's a great padding farm, as well as it has a tendency to drop some high-end items for the Burning Crusade Transmog. Overall, I would generally use this for padding, and if you get a high RNG based item with that, then good, then well done. But overall, I generally use this for padding on my auction house. Overall, you will get a load of reputation for this, so if you are doing this on the regular, it shouldn't take you that long to get exalted with the reputation that you actually receive from this dungeon. That being said, let's move over to our next one at number 29, which is the BLACKROCK Depths. This is by far a brilliant padding location for your auction house for transmog items, and overall what you'll be wanting to do is just run into the instance, gather up all of the mobs and burn them down. It's pretty bog standard, if I do say so myself. The one thing to take note of though is dark iron ore deposits. They are quite heavily prevalent in this dungeon. What you're going to be wanting to do is take a miner with you. And this is because you're leaving a lot of gold on the table when you're doing this farm if you don't bring a miner. That's because dark iron ore sells for a lot of gold, as well as that those deposits have a tendency to drop blood of the mountain, which also sells for a lot of gold. Is combined with a high density of transmog items to sell on the auction house, this is definitely a farm worth pursuing and worth doing. I generally love doing this farm, and it's just one of those ones that has a high RNG for padding out your auction house, as well as getting a load of high value items as well as materials, and it has a chance of dropping some high-end RNG based items like BOEs that sell for a hefty chunk of gold as well. This is just genuinely one of the best farms for transmog overall. That being said, let's jump over to our last and final one at number 30, and that is the BLACKFATHOM Deeps. This is definitely a high RNG based farm. You don't want to come here for padding out your auction house. You're mainly coming here for the specific and unique BOEs that you get from this dungeon, and overall it will take a little bit of time to get a hold of those BOEs, but it is worth the time invested because those items sell for a hefty chunk of gold if you so wish. That being said, it was one of the first transmog farms I ever talked about because it is generally one of my favourite, and that is why I put it at last on this list. That being said, I hope you guys enjoyed the 30 transmog farms that you should be doing. Hopefully this gives you a variety of different types of farms you can test out, farm with, and just overall get yourself into the transmog selling scene. That being said, have a wonderful rest of the day, and I shall see you in the next video, which will be soon.